Welcome to Fix Your Heart or Die, where we forge and repair relationships by making connections through Twin Peaks. I'm your host, Shy Fox, and ever since discovering a hyperfixation for the show right before the passing of David Lynch, I have been seeing electric connections between it and all my favorite games, movies, and TV shows. Now, I want to follow that power line of pop culture legacy wherever it takes me, deepening my parasocial relationships with my favorite voices in podcasting. Keep in mind, I am not an expert, and you don't need to be either to enjoy our silly, serious little show. Myself and longtime Lynch fan Jonathan off Road Rules will show you why you probably already love so much about Twin Peaks, even if you've never seen it, just like I did for 30 years. We will keep spoilers to a minimum so you can get into the show too. However, please understand that we consider the show to be somewhat spoiler-proof because of the unique nature of its story. You'll see what we mean. Anyway, sit back and strap in for the gripping mystery of how everything is a spin-off of Twin Peaks in this exciting episode of Fix Your Heart or Die! Eileen, it's 10:02 a.m. here in Boston, Massachusetts, pursuing a piping hot lead from the dream I had after my enlightening interrogation with Boston's favorite son himself, Jonathan off Road Rules. I of course began approaching every Bostonian lurking beneath the city's bridges, overpasses, and sewer grates to urge them for assistance. I showed them all a quick sketch I'd drawn of one Conrad Zimmerman, whose iconic mustachioed face had appeared to me on a flaming playing card alongside a cartridge of The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening. Before long, Eileen, my scouring of Boston's beanie underbelly paid dividends, as a local bridge troll named Lloyd very helpfully pointed me to a seedy corner of the harbor occupied by a single lonesome boat proprietor. Sure enough, Eileen, this ferryman shook me to the core with his strong resemblance to Conrad Zimmerman from the JimQuisition himself. However, the lovely boy in front of me was lacking his iconic mustache, and, to boot, had some suspiciously slapdash razor burn, which suggested this was a rather hasty choice on his part. Regardless, he had an unnervingly gentle air about him, which convinced me to board his boat in short order. As we shoved off, I compelled him to tell me more about our destination, Rainsford Island. Apparently, however, he had a no talking while boating policy, and opted to instead hand me a torn and tattered printout from Wikipedia, which informed me thusly. Rainsford Island, formerly known as Hospital Island, Pest House Island, and Quarantine Island, is an 11-acre island in the Boston Harbor. The shoreline is predominantly rocky, with well-hidden sandy coves on the southern side, and wildflowers abound. The island is known to have been used by Native Americans before being taken over during the colonial period, as most things were. Between 1737 and 1925, the island served at different times as a quarantine hospital, unmarked burial ground for the criminally diseased, and of course, Eileen, now serves as a sacred spot of worship for Boston's favorite son, Jonathan off Road Rules. Holy moly! And of course, access is by private boat only. Now, Eileen, don't chastise me. I know it would, of course, normally be a crime against the taxpayers to waste the agency's time playing so-called videoed games. But deprived of my suspiciously clean-shaven companion's conversation, I had little choice but to pull out a Nintendo Game Boy that Jonathan had lent me from his pathetically extensive toy collection, and begin revisiting my childhood via Link's Awakening. I just knew that this all had to be connected somehow, Eileen. As Kazumi Totaka's iconic title screen music ramped up, from the ferryman's stoic lips slipped an unnervingly warm yet sinister chortle. And before I knew it, hours were flying by. Eileen, I snapped out of a gamer trance just as we reached our destination, serendipitously as the ending credits rolled on my Game Boy screen. I departed the ferry, and by the time I turned back around to the harbor, the boat and its proprietor were gone. Only the stylish cut-off jean shorts he had worn remained, serving as the only evidence that I did not come here alone. I stashed them in my pocket for later examination and possible use, and then spotted some of the island's locals, almost certain to be Road Rules diehards. According to my exclusive sources at the Wikimedia Foundation, at least. And by an astonishing coincidence, the first islander I approached identified as the fabled Conrad Zimmerman. Still no mustache, though, Eileen. I know you were wondering. Anyway, I wasted no time inquiring about his history of worshipping at the altar of Jonathan. All right, welcome to Fix Your Heart or Die. I'm your host, Shy Fox. With me today are very special guests here on Quarantine Island in Boston. I have a strange mustachioed little man, and he's so strange that he doesn't even have a proper mustache anymore. How odd. Now, what is your name, sir? I'm sorry.
Conrad Zimmerman.
Conrad Zimmerman. That name, it came to me in a dream, on a flaming playing card. I don't know what it means, but I'm sure it's related to, you're on this island because Jonathan off Road Rules, correct?
Well, obviously. I mean, he is everything.
Well, I'm so glad to hear you say that because I'm on a very special mission. Jonathan off Road Rules, as you might know, outside of this island, he's not as famous as he used to be. I've been contracted by a mysterious international client, JSS is how they identified to me, to figure out why Jonathan is not famous outside of this island any longer and how we can fix that. How long have you been here worshipping at the altar of Jonathan?
Oh, Lord, it feels like it's been these 15 years. Jesus Christ, it's been 15 years. I'm old.
Wait, what year is this?
I don't know,
Wait.
Legitimately, what year is this?
You over there. Let's ask her. You over there. Lady with the blue hair.
Look, I would struggle to tell you what year this is. It feels like a dream. Time loses all meaning. But I'm told it's 2025.
Well, I don't think we can trust your sources on that one. Frankly, that sounds preposterous. But, boy, I'm just trying to get some grounding here because I don't know how long my trip to this island took me. I don't know how long I've even been here, to be honest with you. All I know is that I can no longer remember a time when my thoughts were not filled with Jonathan off Road Rules and his dubious levels of fame. Well, who the hell are you anyway? Who are we talking to?
I'm Laura. I'm Laura Kate Dale. I am also a worshipper in the style of all of us here. It's been, the calendar says at least a decade that I've been following Jonathan, but it seems baffling to me that there was ever a time before this.
So, now that we've established the people involved in this part of the mystery, Eileen, you should do some due diligence, follow up on these strange characters if you can, find out everything you need to know about them before we do our next investigation. However, my thoughts are consumed with this dream I had involving Conrad Zimmerman and leading me to this island. All right, Conrad and Laura, I am on a secret mission, a sacred mission, as you can tell. I need to figure out what Zelda Link's Awakening for the Game Boy from 1993 has to do with Twin Peaks, Jonathan Off-Road Rules, and why he is not famous again. Can you please do your best to help me as an acolyte of Jonathan?
Well, I was gonna go hang out with Lloyd down by the river and throw rocks at the bubbles that are floating up to the surface from whatever he put down there last week. But
that sounds pretty important. I mean, we can do this tomorrow.
I mean, I got time.
The bubbles have been there for like a day or two, so like it can't be that urgent.
Oh, I wonder what is breathing down there. I would be interested to know. A giant whale? A windfish, perhaps?
It's probably just decomposing trash, but sure.
Aren't we all? And Laura, how about you? Are you free today to talk to me about Jonathan Off-Road Rules and The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening and how they both relate to Twin Peaks?
Well, funnily enough, person who's come and spoken to us completely impromptu without us having any time to prepare, funnily enough, I do have thoughts about how those two things might be linked.
Wow. And that's a great pun, a quality pun. I'm going to keep calling it out because it's comedy gold, frankly. Funny thing, Eileen, these isolated islanders have an unforeseen familiarity with the pop culture of the outside world, especially video games. So as we looked for a place to have a leisurely chat, I refreshed them on the details of Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. As I told them, Eileen, it was released for an ancient gray brick known as the Nintendo Game Boy in 1993. Link's Awakening was only the fourth major entry in the Japanese giant's pantheon of classic adventure games. The development team, led by gaming icons Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka, was tasked with crafting a Zelda that could feel fantastically expansive, despite its technological constraints. This caused them to draw inspiration from the terrifying tiny town of Twin Peaks, to imbue the world of this Zelda entry with the uniquely surreal sensibilities of this masterpiece television show from David Lynch and Mark Frost, which happened to be explosively popular in Japan at the time, and the world over. And so the legends go. As the series continued, it only became more steeped in these Lynchian trappings, going on to show millions of Nintendo fans just what made the Twin Peaks spirit special, whether they knew it or not. I just had to find out what Conrad and Laura thought about this convergence of pop cultural coolness. But first, having picked up on my bureaucratic leanings, it seemed like they would need some convincing. Alright, well, let's sit down over here near this park bench and just have a sort of unofficial conversation. Neither of you are under arrest at this point, although that could change at any moment. I just need to find out what you know. So let's sit down and sort of relax into an informal atmosphere.
Hang on. I heard arrest. Are you a cop? Because I don't talk to cops.
Oh, well, the tricky thing about that is I know a lot of cops. I spend time around a lot of cops. I go to official buildings marked with 3-letter agency terms such as FBI and CIA. But I'm really more of a cop supporter, if anything.
If you want Conrad to talk to you, the correct answer is no, you're not a cop.
Okay, I am not a cop. I love them and everything about them, to be clear. I want that to be correct.
The less you say, the better your chances here.
All right. Well, you strange little motherfuckers, let's talk about Link's Awakening. So, Laura, let's start with you, because you are extra mysterious. You were not in my dream about Jonathan Off-Road Rules, which is already catching me off guard. I thought that I could be prepared through the psychic realm during my journey here to this quarantine island. I thought I could prepare for what I was going to see and learn, but you have already thrown that concept for a loop. What is up with you? What was your first experience with The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening?
So, my experience with Link's Awakening is that it was one of the first Zelda games I played to completion, so it really stands in my understanding of what a Zelda game is pretty strongly. My love of the Zelda series has always been at its best when these games get weird and ethereal and dreamlike. Like, it should tell you something that two of the games I think of most strongly in the series are Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask, in that they both share this very ethereal, dreamlike quality, full of characters that do not feel at place in the kind of adventure that supposedly you are being told. They feel like they're almost characters from different genres that you're stumbling up against. And that has always fascinated me, in that it's something that I think very few other fantasy adventures of this type ever really dabble in. Too many take the setting of adventure with a sword and shield a little too seriously in its tropes. And Link's Awakening really appealed to me because it just didn't quite feel like it was obeying any of the rules of what the genre it was meant to be.
I completely agree. And I think that it has not only become the template for The Legend of Zelda, I think it's become sort of just the text. Link to the Past for the Super Nintendo gets a lot of credit for establishing what every entry in Zelda would be from then on. And that is true from a structural standpoint. But every other Zelda game since Link's Awakening, tonally, and in terms of its texture and flavor, is cut from the same cloth as Link's Awakening. It has truly never stopped being an influence. Don't you agree, Conrad Zimmerman of the JimQuisition?
I mean, yeah, I think that's true. Although I'm not the biggest Zelda fan. Like, I like the games. It's funny because I have a similar position on Zelda as I do David Lynch as an artist, who ostensibly is the subject of this, podcast. I love Link's Awakening, and I like Zelda 2. I think that one's a neat one, and I like Link to the Past. But that's pretty much it. The rest of them I just respect. I don't have any interest in playing them, but I do have a deep respect for those games. I like Minish Cap too. I take that back. I like Minish Cap. Similarly, David Lynch, I like Twin Peaks a lot. Twin Peaks is great.
I've heard of it, sure.
Other than that, like Eraserhead and Blue Velvet are the only things I really like that I've seen of his, and the rest of it I would not want to experience again. I came across Link's Awakening more or less around the time of its release. Probably maybe about a year later, I managed to pick up a copy on the original brick Game Boy. That God, you could kill somebody with that.
Oh yeah,
and I would love to, and no jury would convict you, frankly.
Yeah, I played it there, and I think the thing that I appreciate so much about it is the scale. Is how small it is. And it's not that small. It's like a 5-hour game, something like that, if you're digging up everything. But 5 hours is a nice compact time. And it's geared towards a portable device, and it's considered for that. And it is probably the first game in my life that made me realize how important a tight scale is, how valuable it is to rein in the scope of a project and keep it contained, and what effect that can have on like the quality of the output. Because Link to the Past is a much bigger game, or at least it feels that way. Certainly it's got its Dark World, Light World stuff, and I don't retain it. And there isn't much going on. There's just huge gaps between interesting things. Koholint Island is so small, and it's so tight, and it allows there to be just a few characters that are important, and it is so perfectly written. But I agree also tonally, it's got those goofy things that do really set tone for later games in the series. Definitely Majora's Mask, Wind Waker, the influences on those games, and then how that later extends out to Breath of the Wild and so forth, in terms of like the aesthetic, the creature design, and sort of the influence visually as it sort of develops along, this combination of creatures and ruins. that has formed now and has sort of become the thing in these current iterations of games. You can trace it all back. It all goes right back to Link's Awakening.
It's interesting when you talk about how it's both compact yet expansive, because for a Game Boy game, it's difficult to articulate how strange it was to have a Game Boy game that felt like a full console experience back in 1993 when Nintendo put this out. So they had to find ways. The entire Game Boy philosophy by Gunpei Yokoi was lateral thinking with withered technology. And that philosophy carries over into the best software for the Game Boy as well, not just the hardware itself, in that they had to use extremely limited tools, even for the time, to make an experience that you could carry around in your pocket and felt like something you would formerly have to sit in front of a, $2,000 to $3,000 home enthusiast computer in order to play. You can now throw in your pocket, throw in your purse, and have with you at any time to pick up and play as you have moments of free time here and there. And that's not novel now because we have the Switch, we have the Steam Deck, we play every game on the go. But back then, you need to examine the fact that they had a very limited space to work with. They had a very limited format to work with. This is one of the biggest Game Boy cartridges made until Pokemon, which of course needed a gigantic cartridge near the end of the Game Boy's life. And it uses every bit and byte that it has available to it, as far as I can tell. And they had to find ways to make this world feel bigger without making the actual map bigger, without adding a bunch of more dungeons, without adding a bunch of new bosses and assets. And they had to find ways to flesh it out without having to push the technology further. It was already at its breaking point. And I think that Twin Peaks, from what I've heard of it, because I've never personally seen the show, I'm no expert, but Twin Peaks, from what I've heard around town, has a sort of similar philosophy in that it was repurposing, in a lot of ways, old hoary soap tropes and repackaging them in a way to sort of smuggle in the David Lynch sensibility into the mainstream consciousness. And in that way, I think they are both, Twin Peaks and Link's Awakening are both Trojan horses for strange ideas that shouldn't have worked in the format they were put in. Only because of the artistry applied do either of them manage any level of success.
I think the thing that I think about a lot with Link's Awakening in terms of comparing it to something like Twin Peaks is that very deliberate design nature of, as you say, because of the technical limitations inherent in trying to get such a big adventure on the original Game Boy, everything that is there for a purpose, and nothing is left to chance or not there because it's trying to build something. And you see this with like setting on early up the chain chomp sort of connected to the building near the start. This unique asset that seemingly is just there as set dressing and later comes back as mechanic. It's something that like feels comparable to, sometimes in Twin Peaks you'll get these long lingering shots that feel on a first view like, what is this here for? Is it just here to pad time? And the more that you soak in Twin Peaks, you start going, okay, that is there for a reason. It is symbolic of something. What am I trying to take away from that? It's that feeling like, even if you don't understand why a thing is there upon first seeing it, within the constraints of its production, it is not there for no reason, and it is working toward a greater whole that you might not yet see.
I think that's an incredibly good way to put it. And the fact is that Link's Awakening is such a foundational game. I want to backtrack and say Link's Awakening is such a foundational game for the idea of things being like Twin Peaks that I'll be frank, when Conrad suggested to me, let's do Link's Awakening, I said, well, hasn't everyone already talked about that 10,000 times? What am I going to say about how Link's Awakening is like Twin Peaks that goes beyond what I find in a lot of interviews, including the recent Mark Frost revelations. But what you always hear is it has a quirky, dreamlike atmosphere. It has an ensemble cast of colorful, wholesome, yet somewhat sinister characters around its fringes, populating its world. And that tends to be where the Twin Peaks comparisons stop. And I think that's fine because that's where a lot of the direct inspiration and a lot of the textual inspiration stops. But boy, I mean, I almost didn't replay Link's Awakening in preparation to this, even though it would have been my first Link's Awakening playthrough since experiencing Twin Peaks as a whole for the first time. As discussed in the pilot, I watched episode 8 of Twin Peaks The Return and then went back and watched the rest of the series from the beginning. So this is the first time I'd experienced Link's Awakening in light of that journey. And I'm so glad that I re-experienced it and I made myself replay a Game Boy game that I've played probably dozens of times throughout the course of my disturbingly long and yet pitifully short life. I made myself do it, and I'm so glad because I saw so much more between the lines of just those two main parallels between the two works. There's so much on offer here. There's so much to think about. I don't think that Takashi Tezuka, the director of this game, and the team at Nintendo ever could have imagined we would be thinking about this game on this level this much longer down the line than they were making it.
No, I think that's probably true. But I also, at the same time, the game came out in 1993. They were in development for a lengthy period of time, but most of the foundational stuff that, makes up Twin Peaks happens in that first season.
Yes.
And so they would have had access to that. And so I do think that there probably are like some real significant inspirations that are being directly drawn from it in a way that we might not see with other art. And obviously we'd be speculating entirely in that vein. But as opposed to some of the other circumstances, like the opportunity was very clearly there and the interest was known, which is interesting.
I completely agree. And I think that this is a good time that we all sit down and say a prayer to Jonathan Off-Road Rules, because while we do so, while we meditate on how much we love him, I have some of his thoughts from our recent interview about why he's not famous that pertain to Link's Awakening. Can I share those with you?
Oh, please.
Nobody was like, this show is so weird. This show is so avant-garde. People were like, everyone's attractive. I have a crush on this one. I have a crush on that one. Bobby or James, the girls had crushes on them. The guys had crushes on Shelley or Laura. And then Laura had her cousin, whose name suddenly escaping me, who also...
Maddie.
She's
full of secrets, if you'll remember.
And things didn't go well for her either. So it was, and it was funny and it was weird. And it had people on the edge of their seat. But the fact that it was surreal wasn't what anyone was talking about, as I recall. And it showed people who wanted to be surreal, and video game developers of that time, they chose video games instead of movies for a reason, for the most part, just because they wanted to dive into the abstract and dive into things that required a little bit more work of the audience, because they're actually playing and needing to put some of themselves into it, which is all stuff that's surrealist and Dadaism and blah, blah, blah. They all wanted people to have to like, not just show up and get entertained and leave. They wanted people to have to think and feel while they're engaging with what they made. So it made sense to all these video game developers that we can just do it the Twin Peaks way without doing a one-to-one copy of it. And it would end up working for them. And the whole concept of like walking around a town and just chatting with NPCs, it happened a few times before Twin Peaks. It happened much more after Twin Peaks.
And it especially happened that they actually had anything to say that felt like not necessarily a normal human being, but NPCs would usually just give you expositional dialogue a lot before that. And now NPCs exist for flavor. They exist to add texture to the world. You want to talk to them even if they're not telling you anything useful.
Right.
That's what I spend so much time in Zelda games, like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild, doing. When I'm not out there doing dungeons, I'm just puttering around town. I'm looking at what people are doing. I'm tracking their schedules. I'm talking to them to see if they have new dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's weird and dumb and doesn't do anything to help me play the Zelda game. But I love it, and it's why I'm there at this point.
Yeah, it's they have their own lives that don't revolve around you and your quest, and it's nice to take a break from yourself. And the irony of it with video games is you're already taking a break for yourself by pretending to be Link, and then you're pretending to be Link being sick of being Link. And now I just want to know, like, why is this guy so obsessed with cats? And I'm going to see if I can help him find his cats. You know, you get to take a massive break from everything and just exist for a little bit, which is a big part of what Twin Peaks did that people could pick up on at the time, which was how many little subplots. But, you know, Mark Frost being a soap opera expert, he was able to know that from the start, that people could really get engaged with fictional characters in that way. But with the Lynch influence, deciding that it'll be a woman with an eye patch who can't stop her exercise bike.
So Jonathan had a lot of thoughts about this. This was one of my favorite clips that he had that represented his thoughts. And something that really comes up there, we use the name David Lynch a lot when it comes to Twin Peaks, but even something that came up so early in discussing this with Conrad was we can't forget Mark Frost. We can't forget that influence here, because he's the surviving member of the duo. He still has some things to say, including the fact that he recently came out and gave us more information about Link's Awakening than we had previously had access to. So Conrad, since you went to bat for Mark Frost so early on, do you have any experience with Hill Street Blues or his earlier work, by the way?
So I was too young for Hill Street Blues when it was airing, so it was not. I think my parents might have watched it, but I never did. And so my first real introduction to Mark Frost is Twin Peaks, and that wouldn't even happen until after the turn of the century. So,
gotcha. And Laura, for a UK perspective, because I don't know if people can tell from your voice, but you are some variant of British. What is any of this even to you? Did any of this make it to you across the pond, as the hip people say, in the time, or did it take longer to get to you after the turn of the century as well?
So, Twin Peaks is definitely one of those things that I was not in the right place or time to be when it was at its cultural peak. I was, you know, born in the early 90s in the UK, and growing up, this was at most talked about in the terms of, like, weird American esoteric cult status.
Oh, that's rich coming from a Brit.
But it's one of those things that the people who I knew who'd watched Twin Peaks that talked about it while I was growing up talked about it in terms of, oh, it doesn't really work over here because it is drawing so much on references to a sort of Americana that we don't really have the cultural reference point for. For the longest time, I took that as given, that not being as intimately familiar with the sort of tone that it steeps itself in would be a barrier to connecting to what it was doing. And I think ultimately, I think that is, if anything, the opposite. I think that feeling of being a little bit of an outsider to the mundane and the baseline of the setting, I think helps with that feeling of disconnect from the events that are going on and aren't quite what they appear on the surface to be.
That's a great way to put it. And when you experienced Twin Peaks, it was already complete, in other words, is what you're saying.
I came to it before the return, but I knew enough going in that Laura Palmer's killer was going to be revealed, and that wasn't something that had been wanted by Lynch. And I knew a little bit about, like, some of what the pacing of this show would end up being. I came into it as something that wasn't airing week to week, for sure.
Yeah, and that changes the whole experience. One of the reasons I wanted to start off talking to Jonathan about this is because he's one of the only people that I have known in my little sphere that is both old enough and not only old enough back when Twin Peaks aired to have seen it, but to somewhat have an appreciation for it, to not come at it as a child. If I had watched Twin Peaks when it aired, I would have been 1 and 2 years old for the first two seasons. You know, it's already a show that's a lot older than any of us feel comfortable admitting. You watch it and it doesn't feel ancient in a lot of ways. It feels more ancient than it is, but it also feels more modern than it is at the same time.
I think a big part of that is that certainly we here in America have never let go of that attachment to this fictionalized Americana. Like, we cling to that. And so it's still in our culture.
Which must be what's so captivating to international audiences on some level. Because I think that international audiences, especially Japanese audiences, not to generalize, they have a real penchant and they have almost a second-hand, further amped up and detached admiration for our obsession with our own supposed heydays, our halcyon eras, and our Americana, as you say.
Well,
It came
we've
up.
been culturally exporting a lot of that all over the world for generations now. Like, our media, because of our position, has proliferated far beyond our borders in ways that a lot of other places, sadly, can't claim. And so I think that also creates a level of familiarity with what America wants to present itself as opposed to what America actually is.
Yeah, like as much as I say that I, being in the UK, don't have that same familiarity with that, I don't have the touchstones of the specific American sort of sitcom style media that like Twin Peaks is borrowing a lot of its flavor from. But watching it, there is something through osmosis that is weirdly familiar about it, even without knowing any of the direct things it's pulling its flavor from, just because background understanding of American self-idealized images are just that pervasively something that floats around, and like I've got an idea of it in my head even without seeing the things that it's working from.
Which is sort of like a dream, by the
Well,
way.
exactly. It's almost like a dream.
And as the show itself teaches us, Twin Peaks is just a dream we're living over and over and over again together.
I recognize this thing that I've never seen before, and I don't know any of the faces or people, but it still feels weirdly normal and at home.
And I need to tell you guys this. That's a perfect opportunity to make a confession, a heartbreaking confession. As a Twin Peaks newcomer turned obsessive, I was rewatching the first few episodes of Twin Peaks in the lead up to this because, to me, Twin Peaks we all take so many different things from it. There's so many things to get from it depending on what kind of viewer you are. I'm the kind of wiki diving, lore loving fan for things like this that I become hyper obsessed with. But as I told Jonathan, the actual moment to moment of a lot of Twin Peaks episodes, especially some of the season 2 stuff, most of the season 2 stuff, I can barely fucking remember. Like it was a weird bad dream.
That is the one thing that the writers managed to get right about the tone for this second 2/3 of season 2.
But again, I think, pulling this back to Link's Awakening, I did a bit of replaying this week ahead of this, and I had a similar experience of, it's not that long since I've played Link's Awakening. I replayed that through when the Switch remake happened, a couple of years ago at most now, that must have been.
2019, shockingly, yeah.
Oh, I don't like that knowledge. But
Speaking of
so,
Quarantine Island.
Yeah, even so, in a relative sense, it's not been that long since I've played it. There were specifics that completely I did not remember were part of this game, but the shape of it remains. It is one of those things where it does capture this dreamlike sense of, oh, of course that's here. No part of me wants to question why there's Mario characters and enemies here. No part of me feels out of place when something I don't remember is there. It just sort of feels correct in the moment.
And it helps that those Mario enemies, especially the Shy Guys, which are some of the more prominent enemies, I would say, that appear from the Mario series, and they're my favorite Mario enemy and one of my favorite characters. But the Shy Guys, for instance, it's interesting to note, they first appeared in Doki Doki Panic. You know, I don't need to tell the whole Mario 2 story. If you're niche enough to listen to this podcast, you probably know about Mario 2. But Shy Guys were not a Mario enemy, so they were explained as being a Mario enemy now by coming from Mario's dream. They came from the land of Subcon, and they're popping up in a Zelda dream as well. And I was going to say Link's dream, but this game purports, at least, it textually tells you that the Windfish is the one having this dream. It is the primary dreamer who's creating the world of Koholint Island that Link has crashed upon. And it's a shared dream even in that aspect, because the Windfish or Link or whoever is dreaming all of this up, it has overlap with Subcon, it has connections to Mario, and in a way that creates a really cool little shared universe without actually having Mario and Zelda exist on the same planet or even within the same reality, and it allows Nintendo to sort of link its franchises together both before that was cool and without wrangling with the implications that come along with having those characters in the same world.
Well, and I think releasing the game on the Game Boy also really helps to make that possible, because while the Game Boy was definitely a major product for Nintendo, it wasn't their flagship product. And they could do some weirder, more experimental things in that space. And so being self-referential just for funsies was something that you could do. And because of the framing of Link's Awakening as being a dream as well, it's not going to harm the larger context of the franchise, and they can get away with it. Also, you mentioned the Shy Guys. Wart's in there too, the villain from Super Mario Brothers 2.
This is the only game aside from Mario 2 where he appears in any official capacity, and he really doesn't even make cameos or anything that often, aside from the Oracle Zelda games, which just reuse all of the assets and sprites from this, so I don't take that very seriously. But yeah, he's only in Mario 2 and this. Even weird Mario games, even Mario RPGs and stuff, have never brought back Wart in any capacity, but here he is on Koholint Island. It's very odd.
Yeah, the thing about some of these out of series things that I think works well is that I'm blanking on the name of it now, but there is a Link to the Past enemy that functionally is pretty similar to the Shy Guy in terms of it is a small masked creature that's like primarily its face is this white-esque mask that to me, I see the Shy Guys and I'm like, oh, it's like when you have a dream and that person's meant to represent someone you know, but it doesn't look like them, but you sort of know it's them still.
I know the enemy you're talking about. So functionally, both of these enemies in both of these games, they move in coordination with Link. They respond exactly to your button inputs as he does. This
is what I'm getting to, is it feels like it is that even though, you know, the teacher in your dream doesn't have the face that your teacher had, that person's essentially playing your teacher in the dream. It feels like that kind of flavor. And I think that applies to a lot of these crossover enemies. You see, like, a lot of the way that Wart fights is similar to frog-esque bosses that we've seen elsewhere in the Zelda series. Kirby functions not dissimilarly to likes in other Zelda games. There's these parallels you can draw that's not quite right, but I can see that it's that thing I know.
It's so easy to ignore Kirby in relation to this. I'm so glad you brought up Kirby because he's the strangest inclusion here. The fact that there are fake Kirbys as normal enemies in, I believe, it's only Dungeon 7 or 8, correct? That they show up.
Yeah, it's one of the late ones.
But Kirby is the Dream Warrior. That is his entire title.
Dream Warrior!
Fuck, that song rocks.
He
Oh, it's
comes
so
from
good.
Dreamland.
Yeah.
Boy, the whole guy is themed around dreams.
It is the stuff that is canonically Nintendo's dream characters do seem to disproportionately show up here, and that doesn't feel accidental.
No.
It sure doesn't, and it only feels accidental or surprising because of how early on it happened. If Nintendo made a modern Zelda game and this was the first time that, say, a Bomb popped up in a Zelda game for the first time in Breath of the Wild, I really wouldn't bat an eyelash, because at this point, universe sharing is such, we're all getting sick of it. It's such a pervasive concept these days. But I wouldn't have batted an eyelash now, but back then, Nintendo especially was incredibly precious about their intellectual properties. They were very hard line about keeping much explicit bleed over between these concepts. And I think that maybe this game was sort of an outlet for them. A way, like you say, Conrad, that they could do these strange things and not have it impact the actual future of the Zelda series if they chose to quarantine these weird elements in here and never reference them again.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a big part of it is the technical limitations of the Game Boy platform, right? And in the mind of the consumer, it's like, oh, well, that's separate from the NES or the Super NES, because this is just the side thing. It's not meant to be the full thing because it's so fit in my pocket, it's underpowered, et cetera, et cetera. The customer will be able to fill in the gaps as to why this can be siloed. And it gives you the opportunity to take anything that you want and leave whatever else behind. It's really smart.
And it leverages the power of the fact that almost nobody outside of the hardcore enthusiast space in video games, especially back in 1993, when that was barely a cemented part of the pop culture community, they could rely on the fact also that the main people experiencing this and thinking about the implications of this were going to be children who weren't thinking that much about this game. They were throwing in a bag and popping open to do a couple dungeons here and there. And also very odd, older adult enthusiasts, people who were already playing video games as adults in 1993, which, wow, what a concept. I can't even imagine what that was like for people who were older than me. And they could rely on the fact that this analysis was going to fly under the radar for a long time, if it was ever thought about at all, because thinking about a Game Boy game academically, or a video game, or even computers or computer software as a whole, was something that most people would call absurd and ridiculous. A lot of people still would call it absurd and ridiculous.
Well, my father was a video game player as an adult throughout his life. He was in his 20s, late 20s, during the golden age of arcades. He was a pretty good Pac-Man player, apparently. And so, like, he's the one who introduced me to video games. He had a portable, quote-unquote, portable computer back around, like, 1983, 84. It's the size of a large briefcase, like a large briefcase, and weighs a ton and has a built-in display that displays in monochrome and weighs like 60 pounds. But
sounds like a beast.
But there was a version of Donkey Kong someone had programmed for it using ASCII characters.
Oh, yeah.
And so some of my earliest video game memories are playing this ASCII Donkey Kong and an ASCII Pac-Man that he had for this machine. And he bought a ColecoVision for me for Christmas that he got as much use out of as I did for the first like couple of years that we had it. And it was one of those things where it felt like it was more for him. But that's also where he stopped console gaming. You know, I didn't get an NES, and he didn't express much interest in it because the path that games were on diverted for him and his interests at that point. He had always been more interested in arcade games, and the world had started to move on. into more expansive experiences. And he liked the simpler things. He continued to play Pengo on his IBM PC every morning for a decade.
Is that
Probably.
the Hideo Kojima Penguin game, or is that a different Penguin game?
I don't know if Kojima, maybe. I think Konami did make that. It's a block pushing game.
That's a Hideo Kojima game, I believe, yeah.
Wow. Yeah, wow, that's wild. Yeah, he played Pengo forever. And then, eventually got him into Warcraft. Somehow. Having to do with my grandfather's death. Yeah, so... And I have similarly had those divergence points for myself. Like, in my 20s, when everything started to go multiplayer, I started to tune out. And that's why I play largely smaller scale experiences in a lot of ways now. It's not just because I don't have the time, although that's true. It's just that there aren't that many games designed for just me to play.
And I think about that a lot. People are always trying to get me to play multiplayer games too. And I love sharing experiences with people. I like playing, especially fighting games, with people who are like me in that we're better than casual fighting game players, but not as good as competitive fighting game players. The point is, I can enjoy multiplayer experiences, but games like Link's Awakening and smaller single-player experiences fashioned in the same manner. What I always tell people, why I want to play a 100-hour RPG like Metaphor, which I've been playing since October and still haven't finished yet, why I want to play a game like that instead of hopping on, Fortnite, or not to be reductive, but any multiplayer hot game, Apex Legends, Marvel Rivals, or whatever. We don't want to talk about that whole snafu that just happened. The reason I want to hop on and play more Metaphor and plunk in 10 more hours in a day toward having this gameplay experience that only I will ever know about is because video games and things like Twin Peaks and David Lynch movies are a good conduit to have conversations with a piece of art and with myself. And I get so few opportunities to really do that. I don't sit and think about myself. I don't sit and think about my internal life and how I relate to the world and art around me a whole lot. And that's my opportunity to do so. It's not a social experience. It's a break from social experiences.
I just don't like playing games with people I can't see right in front of me. Because I think of games as being actual social experiences, if I'm honest. Yeah. I classify board games and video games in two very different camps. And with the death of arcades, video games now wholly exist in that other world. Where, unless I'm having a LAN party for some fucking reason, like, I'm not gonna have that in front of me experience. And so much of games is psychological.
Yeah.
And being able to look someone in the eye and lie to them, it's so crucial. That separation that is inherent to not being in the room with the other player changes the dynamic in such a way that it makes it impersonal. Just by dint of them not being there.
You might as well be playing against a well-designed AI at that point. It's not the experience of playing against a person.
Right. Yeah.
And that's a great way to bring it back to Link's Awakening, because when you talk about that, when you talk about if you're going to be playing with a random person who you don't know and you can't see, they might as well be computer controlled. That's a great way to explain when I'm out there having social gaming experiences, interacting with players performed by other characters. They are often, or they're almost never, unless you have a real cut up, a real performer on the voice chat, and who wants to listen to the voice chat anyway with randos, unless you have someone who's a real showstopper in the game chat, this person is going to be silent while they're performing gameplay with you, and they are going to have no real apparent personality that you can perceive. So not only had they might as well be an NPC, but they provide less rich and conducive to a thoughtful experience sort of behavior and texture to the world. They don't add the same things that a quirky NPC who's wandering around acting of their own accord in ways tied to the game systems would act. They don't have that level of personality. They don't enrich the world in the same way an NPC does. So to me, yeah, it's actually worse if they're not a computer-controlled player.
I have a separate thought, and I know this is a bit of a sideways turn, but I have ADHD,
Please,
and I'm going to forget this thought if I don't say
don't
it
we
now.
all?
So I'm going to jump. I'm going to jump on this one. So a thing I keep thinking about when thinking about Link's Awakening and comparing it to Twin Peaks, this is one of the shortest Zelda games, and it is a short Zelda game that its adventure, very specifically, there is not a huge amount of side content to be doing. There's a lot of side conversations to be having for flavor. There are Zelda games you could possibly look at and say there is more stuff to do technically along the way for that journey to extend it.
There's really only one big side quest in this game.
Yeah, is the big trading quest, obviously. But this is an adventure that, because of the fact that it's taking place in a dream, and that very firmly, when the dream ends, the adventure ends, you are left alone floating in the ocean, everything is over when you finish this adventure. The thought I keep having is, maybe solving the mystery or waking the winged fish isn't the right thing to rush ahead to do quickly. Maybe maybe putting that off would keep the adventure alive. And I think about this in terms of, in the context of the narrative of Link's Awakening, the lives that could have kept going and could have been extended, that could have been explored further had Link not gone, well, the adventure is wake up the windfish, I woke up the windfish, all of that is gone, feels weirdly paralleled to that whole idea of, and I think a lot of people sort of have the same opinion about Twin Peaks, that something of it dies when you rush to get to the finish line rather than enjoying being in the journey with the people along the way. You can't go back to having those conversations with those people in the town the same way you were once you've woken the windfish. You have irrevocably given up on that exploration of that community in the way that you were doing. Does that make sense as a thought?
It not only makes sense as a thought, but it brings me to so many. So the first thing to leap to mind is that next time, Laura, you and I will be discussing Severance, Season 1. And that to me draws a parallel between the lives of the innies at Lumen, which are their dream selves in a lot of ways, and how leaving Koholint Island, or leaving the severed floor of Lumen, it effectively ends the life of the people within, and to rush to the end, to not experience the life within that dream before the dream is over, and then you lose it permanently. It's not ever something that can be, just like we all know, when you have a good dream and you think, man, I wish I could see more of what was going to happen there.
Yeah.
The more you want to know more about a dream, the less you will ever know.
Exactly. It's, again, you look at something like Twin Peaks and going back into Season 2 after the reveal of Laura Palmer's killer, it does feel in some ways like you've woken up and you've tried to go back to sleep into that dream, and it's just not the same dream that it was.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I think that's a really apt metaphor. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, I have to ask, because I've only experienced Twin Peaks as a whole. When you two saw Seasons 1 and 2 of Twin Peaks, just as a separate entity as they were for 25 years in the gap between seasons, because Fire Walk with Me did not continue the story of Twin Peaks in between. It went backwards. Do you think you two felt that way about it just as Seasons 1 and 2 and Fire Walk with Me, or do you think it took the return coming back around to show you this repeating dream sort of bent that the story has?
I mean, some of that it's pretty there.
Yeah.
Honestly, and I think everything you need to get what Twin Peaks is doing is in Season 1. All the atmosphere, all the dream stuff, it's there. Dale Cooper's single-minded motivation to solve the mystery being sort of slowly overtaken by the charm of the locale and the community that's there. Like, it's all sort of in the mix, but it's also very clear that continuing to pursue the mystery at the heart of it, even in that time, is having more destructive results, right?
Hmm.
It is impacting all of these secondary characters in negative ways the more they learn about Laura Palmer. And so they all suffer for trying to solve the mystery. The clues were all there.
And they were all happier when Laura Palmer was who they thought she was. When to them, she was just the perfect prom queen who was going to be, you know, the next big thing to break out of the town, and that showed their little wholesome life in this tiny mountain town.
Yeah.
Had wholesomeness and integrity and still represented the Americana ideals of purity and goodness. And the fact that they come to discover, like you say, the more they find out about her, the unhappier they are, the more it ruins everyone's lives, and it has a ripple effect where it starts ruining and disrupting the entire psychic fabric of this community.
And this is, again, a little bit of a tangent from Link's Awakening slightly, but I think Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask are two really interesting comparison points when looking at the idea of Twin Peaks and the impact of it revealing its mystery when it did, in that Link's Awakening is, to a degree, what happens when you end the dream at the expense of the lives that were there to be explored along the way. And it wasn't that many years later that Nintendo sort of revisited, had Majora's Mask. And Majora's Mask is almost the antithesis there, in that it is a game about knowing that the end is coming and that inevitably that end will have to come, but putting it off as long as you can to have more time to take in the small town. That is very much an adventure of, yes, sure, in theory, things could end here, but there's so much richness to explore here, even if it means nothing is permanent, nothing is tangible. Exploring the stories of the people for their own sake as long as you can before going, fine, I guess we got to end this sometime. And it's two very different approaches to being in a small, dreamlike community who inevitably will not be the same after you finish the adventure you're on, in terms of feeling like Link is either barreling toward, well, we've got to give you the answers, or the last thing we actually want here is to give the answers.
That's incredible to consider, and it's so hard to not talk about Majora's Mask right now, because that needs to be at least its own separate episode if this show continues to be a thing. So Link's Awakening and Majora's Mask, not only do they both share all the similarities we touched upon, but just the way they begin is very similar and intentional, I feel, where they both essentially begin by depicting what could be very easily interpreted as the death of the hero. And I'm so, as people who have been reading about tropes online for decades, we're so sick of theories where the hero was dead all along. It almost never is as deep of a theory as people like to trot it out as. So it feels hacky to even say it. But the fact that both of these games open with circumstances where you could very say, well, Link just fucking died, and this is just what we're seeing afterward, or this is a different dimension, or it's a psychic plane. It exists outside of physical reality in some manner. And in a parallel to Twin Peaks: The Return and Twin Peaks as a whole, they both accidentally sort of thrust at the idea that by getting involved at all and by completing this journey, Link is not necessarily, from certain perspectives, performing an ultimate act of good.
Yeah. In both as well, like, it's more metaphorical, obviously, in Twin Peaks, but death is hanging over the entire pursuit. Be it the windfish at the top of the island, constantly there as, this is what will end all of this, be it the moon falling, being the constant posters everywhere about Laura Palmer. You are exploring these lives under the specter of death, whether you know it or not.
And Link and Dale are both going through endless cycles where they're trying to salvage things. They're telling themselves that they're preventing this doomsday, this ultimate disaster, and saving these townspeople. But in effect, what happens to the townspeople of Koholint and Termina at the end of these Zelda games is that no matter what Link does, they're gone forever. As far as Hyrule is concerned, as far as further Zelda adventures are concerned, these people are dead and gone, whether Link does anything or not. And by going through and being, like Dale, a little control freak and trying to make everything perfect, he's creating, well, each time he goes through a cycle in Majora's Mask specifically, since he cannot perform every side quest and wrap up every subplot in a single cycle, at least I don't think that's even theoretically possible within the gameplay. I think that when you finally do end Majora's Mask after the final cycle, there are so many subplots and character problems that aren't wrapped up because they did not happen in that loop of game. So these people are still unresolved as they march toward the end of their reality and their existence. So while Link was having these effects and fixing these problems, they're probably still there if the world even continues to exist. He only helps these problems by destroying the framework in which they can even exist in the first place. Wow, Laura and Conrad. I can't believe you guys just happened to have a Keaton mask and a stone mask from Majora's Mask handy. Did you plan this? You don't have to put them on, though. Wait, Laura, what are you doing with that burlap sack? And hey, where did Conrad take that big stick that was sitting nearby? Oh, sugar.
Put a woman's underwear, I think, in his mouth?
Eileen, I'm in an unknown place at an unknown time. I hope you can hear me.
Jonathan Off-Road Rules is going to be famous again.
What? Who's there? Show yourself, fiend. I mean, I agree, but yeah, show yourself.
That mesh tank top he likes to wear is going to come back into style.
Well, that's good news at least. Wait, Eileen! It's stepping out of the shadows, and it's covered entirely in hair.
I am the missing mustache of Conrad Zimmerman, and I sound like this.
Yo, motherfucker. Oh, thank God. Finally, something on this island that makes some dang sense. Anyway, what do you want, missing mustache of Conrad Zimmerman?
Tell me where to find Conrad and his friends on social media.
Aw, buddy. Well, you're just trying to maintain his profile for him, huh? Well, yeah, I mean, you can of course find him on Twitter and Blue Sky as @ConradZimmerman. And if you want to buy his merchandise, you can check out mercenarycreative.com. And his friend Laura Kate Dale, well, she's on every damn website as @LauraKBuzz. Plus, you can hear both of these guys every week on the JimQuisition podcast with Stephanie Sterling. And speaking of which, while you're logged on there, you might as well look for my new show, Fix Your Heart or Die, everywhere as Fix Your Heart Pod. Even patreon.com/fixyourheartpod. Hello? Eileen, as soon as I finished my very tasteful plugs, the mustache vanished into thin air. Hopefully, both it and anyone listening to this recording all went to subscribe to those links immediately. Next time, I will find my way out of wherever this is and finish my investigation on The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. And until next time, Eileen, as always, fix your heart or die!
Fix Your Heart or Die podcast is hosted by Shy Fox and produced by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Music by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Sound effects sourced from Pixabay. Check the show notes of this episode for links to our guests' social media and additional resources about the projects they're promoting. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/fixyourheartpod.
The happening be happening.
To quickly address that, you can complete an ending of every quest in one cycle, but you will inevitably... some of those will diverge, and because you made one choice, a different thing cannot happen. Because of divergence in some of the quest lines, it is impossible for every best thing to happen in one cycle, yeah.
And that's just life, you know?
Yeah.
People are very strange these days, Mark.
Well, I think there's only one way to start. First off, I'm sure that Eileen will want to know when she listens back to this tape recording. Where can I find Conrad Zimmerman online?
You can find me on Blue Sky at Conrad Zimmerman, and I make anti-capitalist propaganda that I sell at mercenarycreative.com, and you can hear me talking about video games on the Podquisition podcast, which is on SoundCloud and wherever you get podcasts, although you might have to search for JimQuisition to find that. And yeah, that's... Oh, and I do a podcast about snacks called Let's Talk About Snacks. And I produce a communist roundtable show called Red Planet. God damn it. Too many podcasts.
Too many.
There are
that's-
too many podcasts.
Yeah, there are.
To quote the great Abe Simpson, we should eliminate at least 3.
Well, if we're going to eliminate at least 3, I should probably be on the chopping block for eliminating some of mine. I do too many things.
And you're Laura Kate Dale. Where can we find these things that you do, supposedly?
Yeah, my things can supposedly be found at Laura K. Buzz. If you search that, you'll probably find the things, which include such podcasts as Dice Funk, Podquisition, Control-Alt-Access, Abletop, a whole bunch of things. I talk about video game and board game accessibility on the internet a bunch, and I speedrun video games that no one cares about. I am the fastest babysitter in 2010's Babysitting Mama for the Wii, and that's a thing that I find pride in.
It's more pride than I've ever had in anything, frankly. I don't think I've ever done anything on that level of accomplishment, and I'm not sure I ever will unless I manage to crack this case, quite frankly. Welcome to Fix Your Heart or Die, where we forge and repair relationships by making connections through Twin Peaks. I'm your host, Shy Fox, and ever since discovering a hyperfixation for the show right before the passing of David Lynch, I have been seeing electric connections between it and all my favorite games, movies, and TV shows. Now, I want to follow that power line of pop culture legacy wherever it takes me, deepening my parasocial relationships with my favorite voices in podcasting. Keep in mind, I am not an expert, and you don't need to be either to enjoy our silly, serious little show. Myself and longtime Lynch fan Jonathan off Road Rules will show you why you probably already love so much about Twin Peaks, even if you've never seen it, just like I did for 30 years. We will keep spoilers to a minimum so you can get into the show too. However, please understand that we consider the show to be somewhat spoiler-proof because of the unique nature of its story. You'll see what we mean. Anyway, sit back and strap in for the gripping mystery of how everything is a spin-off of Twin Peaks in this exciting episode of Fix Your Heart or Die!
Eileen, is this thing on? Is it broken? Am I? I've awoken in complete darkness, burlap sack bristling against my face. I can feel my precious Blue Yeti microphone nearby, so I hope you can hear me. I hear faint murmuring nearby. No doubt Conrad Zimmerman and Laura Kate Dale are planning a dismal demise for yours truly. At this point, I can only hope they skin and prepare my most succulent morsels before they spoil in this dank cave. I may not condone their casually cannibalistic ways, Eileen, but foodborne illness is no joke. Reaching out, I feel a stone tablet nearby, written in Morse code, but why? Thankfully, my many years of having no friends at the academy afforded me plenty of time to learn enough to know that it says, "The most foxy of fools may think he rules the northern trails, and yet he fails to ask our city's favorite son, the original Chungus Jonathan. Who is the dreamer he purports, grasping his most sacred jorts? 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 Footsteps. They're coming closer. I have to hurry and think. Something about the cut-off jean shorts I grabbed from the docks when I arrived. Okay, I'll clutch them in my hand and yell into the cavern surrounding me. Jonathan off Road Rules! Who is the dreamer?
That's a great question. It's tempting to want to do a joke answer, but I like to think that the dreamer is all of us simultaneously.
Like in Link's Awakening, again.
Yeah, I guess so. Link's Awakening, were those characters real? Were they a figment of the Windfish's imagination or the player's imagination, the developer's imagination? The reality is, they touch on this in Mother 3 too. I don't know if you played that one.
I have, and the ending is incredibly Lynchian with the Nowhere Island story and everything.
Yeah. Yep, and similar to Link's Awakening too. All those games were percolating in Nintendo around the same time. There's a story that Shigesato Itoi, the creator of Mother/Earthbound, he accidentally created Animal Crossing.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know if you know that one. He's like, I pitched that idea, but I didn't tell anybody but this one guy, but then somebody else had the exact same idea, and then it came out, and Animal Crossing is definitely influenced by Mother/Earthbound. The presents are like exactly the same, which then also influenced Pokemon.
Yes.
And it all is connected to Twin Peaks because he was watching Twin Peaks at the time and said specifically he wanted to give you that insidious feeling that everyone's acting normal on the surface, but something terrible is happening underneath. There's that in both the Foreside level and Earthbound, and also. Anyway, you asked me about the Dreamer, and just
This
as we're
is a great
all
answer. It's been a great answer.
we're playing the video game together, and what's real and what's not is all a matter of how connected you feel to it. We talk about reality in terms of like physical tangibility, but in the end, it's more about whether it was real and meaningful, whether it had substance. And we're all engaging with this substance that we think is real, but maybe isn't, both tangibly and meaningfully all the time. And therefore, we're all dreaming through this weird thing that is waking life, I guess.
Agreed.
And we're doing it together. So we're all the dreamers, is my guess.
Wait, I can hear Jonathan around me, as though I was just speaking to him. But I would recognize that suspicious stench of that aftershave anywhere. It's you, Conrad Zimmerman, and Laura Kate Dale. Did you hear Jonathan too? Please, before you kill me, at least tell me what you thought of his wise words.
No thought is original. All thoughts come from Jonathan. We know this.
It's true.
So, in terms of this podcast, Jonathan is the dreamer. This podcast only exists because Jonathan liked Twin Peaks before anyone else I knew, and before anyone else I knew had expressed deep thoughts about it that made me want to probe beyond the concept of it being kind of like Link's Awakening and kind of like Earthbound and all these video games and TV shows I had loved in the 30 years between hearing Twin Peaks comparisons to Link's Awakening and actually watching Twin Peaks. Jonathan was on the ground floor of a lot of these ideas. He was having these ideas. And when I had this conversation with him, this interrogation, this very serious mystery interrogation of why he's not famous, I found it fascinating how he kept saying things that felt sprung from my own mind in a way that felt extra surreal considering the subject matter.
Yes. So you're asking who the dreamer is. And
in Link's Awakening specifically, but
yeah,
I guess we can talk about it broadly.
For Link's Awakening specifically, my answer to this, if you asked me a different day, I might answer differently, but the thing that's coming to mind today is I think a lot about video game Undertale. Undertale is a video game that can be played in a couple of different ways, and one of the ways that you can play it, it's the most difficult mechanically to do it, is to go through and kill absolutely every creature you encounter, and you become the villain of the story. You are put up against roadblocks telling you, do not do this, do not go through and kill all these beloved characters. And one thing that does, and I promise this will get back to Link's Awakening, one thing that sort of posits to you as a player is it takes a gamble by assuming your reasoning for playing it that way. And I think for most people this is probably accurate, is you've played it other ways, and at this point you're doing it because mechanically, video game conventions say there is content to be experienced and to get to the end of, and that's what you do with a video game. That at a certain point, mechanically, as the person playing a video game, you are going to go and finish the video game because finishing the video game and seeing it be over and having that closure of completion is something you don't question in the medium. And to go back to Link's Awakening, I think that there is something to the fact that as the player of that video game, I am the person ultimately responsible for choosing to end the dream. You know, there's nothing that says I could not play that game through to the point of discovering if I complete this world of characters will cease to be. The right thing for me to do is to not see the end of the video game and to let them live in perpetuity on this little cartridge that I never completed and have my ending be, I did not sacrifice them for my own ability to escape. And looking at it through that lens, I think Link is the dreamer, the player is responsible for ending the dream, in which case the player is Link the dreamer. The player is both the one perpetuating the dream and making the decision to ultimately complete the quest that ends the dream. Link is the dreamer and the one ending the dream.
I agree in many ways, but Conrad, you were telling me about how your favorite character, Grandma Yahoo, who brushes the floor with a broom in perpetuity in Koholint Village. You were telling me that you believe she's the dreamer, is that correct?
No, I don't think I recall saying that at all.
Oh, okay. Well, that just must have been something that came to me as I was leaning up against a hot car. So what is your opinion?
I'm in the same sort of boat as Laura is. I think Link is the dreamer. And I think all of Koholint Island is sort of a traumatic response to the events that immediately precede this. It is his mind going to a safe place, but being incapable of remaining in that safe place.
Yeah.
He's
And his
compelled
mind
to
is the
move
windfish's
forward.
egg.
Right, essentially. So yeah, I think Link is the dreamer, but I also think that he is not able to compel himself to remain in the dream. And if we want to get sort of further meta existential about it, then
we do.
Sure. We the players are the puppet master, sort of pushing Link in that direction, and to a degree it's our selfishness that is forcing Link to be in this position, because we could force him to stop. Left to his own devices, in the narrative, he would probably go ahead anyway, because that's kind of his ethos. He's an explorer, and he wants to solve this mystery. So that fits with his character, but we can't know whether he'd do it without us.
Well, I think in terms of like my thinking about would he do it without us, I think to me the answer is he would, because in this dream, to me the windfish is an externalization of the fact this is his dream. If he acknowledges it's his dream, he has to acknowledge he's the one choosing to end all of these lives. Whereas if it is an externalized villain with like a series of things that I have to overcome and that will wake up the fish and defeat the big bad, it fits the framework and the narrative of the adventures he is accustomed to. And it allows him to a degree to do the thing because that's what you do in the adventure. And it's not me that's ending the dream, it's the windfish waking up, and the consequence of that is everyone ceasing to be. It is a tool to not have to take internalized responsibility for ending the dream, to a degree.
And I agree with all of this. In fact, what's strange to me is, since this is the first time I'm really considering it on this level, I always took the fact that the windfish was the dreamer to be a given, because the game tells you, and that's what we tend to do when fiction gives us an explicit answer, especially when it's a work that doesn't immediately lend itself to trenchant digging through of its core materials like we're tasked with doing here. You can kind of just take that on face value and move on with your life. But even more on face value, and I don't know why this doesn't take priority in my mind and in the minds of others, even more on face value is the fact that the game is called Link's Awakening. And of course, that could just mean he's waking up after the windfish wakes up. But I think the end of the game is Link's Awakening. It's spoiling the ending for you. He wakes up and the dream is gone. So why are we not all talking about how Link is the dreamer?
Because for Link to be the dreamer, you have to acknowledge that to a certain degree the hero did something that has debatably negative consequences. You have to see that from a certain point of view, if Link is the dreamer, Link chose to end a number of rich, very real feeling lives in order to return to his perceived, more credible reality.
And it's one of the first games I can think of in that way that has an ending that's bittersweet in really any more, because of course there were games like Mega Man 2 or 3, I believe it is, where Mega Man stands over the cliffside and thinks about how he just murdered an old robot-loving man and what that could imply for his level of humanity. There were contemplative and bittersweet endings before this, but not in the same way where, if you look into it, the game is making us settle, like we say, a criticism leveled at Link and the player for being involved at all. if not a criticism, then just asking you to question the fact whether what you did was for the ultimate good or actually accomplished anything. And that's something we take as a given these days. Video games that are thrusting toward artistic ideas, they go to the well a lot, like Spec Ops: The Line, even though that's already an incredibly outdated reference at this point. It feels like still a touchstone for a flashpoint in this moment in time where it was popular for a minute for games to interrogate the relationship between the player and performing the actions in the game. That was when a lot of people turned on to considering this.
Like, even outside of that as a consideration, you could compare this to something like the Tuvix episode of Star Trek Voyager, the sort of exploration of, is it okay to sacrifice lives that are here in this moment in the present in order to get back to a baseline and a reality that once was? And does restoring life as it was previously take precedence over preserving it as it is now? It's, very similar sort of explorations that this forces you. Well, it doesn't force you. It leaves room for you to have those explorations.
Incredible. Just, it's a 30-year-old Game Boy game. We're still getting, the three of us are not only, because we use this term, well, you're talking about it, as if that's self-evident of something's value and worth. And it's overused, but the fact that we're still talking about it, and I'm still having, I sent you guys like a 3,000-word screed about my free association of Link's Awakening. I halfway thought that it would cause no one to ever speak to me again when I wrote this up, because it's just, I'm not a philosophical expert in any way. I don't have deep wells of psychic value to add to pop culture analysis necessarily, but I'm just free association, thinking through these thoughts, writing them down for you guys to be punished by reading over. And I'm having all of these original thoughts about Link's Awakening. When I finished doing that, I thought, well, I'll never have an original thought about Link's Awakening again. But then just every other sentence, every new segment we've reached in this podcast makes me wish we had an entire hour to devote just to drilling down into this. And how does this happen? How is this possible? I don't get it, you guys.
If you stop and slow down and think about any piece of media, it's not as hard as you would imagine to have an original thought about things. Well, half the time, it's just slow down and think about stuff and talk it out.
And you talked about your screed, which, yeah, that's a word that I would probably use to describe it. But it's so indicative of the human capacity to recognize patterns and draw connections between things. And it's aided by the fact that media like Link's Awakening, like Twin Peaks, it's encouraging you to think about it, but it's also leaving space, as Laura described it. That's kind of the key thing, is that it is leaving space there for you to consider these things. That's one of the things Lynch does so often and so well in his work. And it's part of the reason I can't watch his movies. And I'm fine with it in Twin Peaks, but it's those empty spaces where it seems like nothing is happening. And that is the show giving your brain a break. So that it's ceasing to tell you things so that you can start to have ideas on your own. And I love that aspect of what he does. It's all about leaving space for people to think.
And a lot of people would call space like that filler, which is a word that has its application, but I really hate, especially when it's in adult prestige dramas like Twin Peaks: The Return. They say that filler is boring. They only want plot progression. They want every scene to advance the plot in some way and move things along. But in Twin Peaks: The Return, and in Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening, and in Twin Peaks: The Original, a lot of the best moments that stick with me the most are when I'm just sitting in a space and pondering it. And like you say, this supposed filler or empty space is empty because it's there to allow us an avenue through which to insert ourselves into the world.
Oh, what I find so frustrating about that critique of these things just being filler is that it is the tangible facts on the ground of the production of Twin Peaks: The Return completely tear that to shreds. Because Lynch walked away at one point from the production of The Return because Showtime wanted to limit his budget in such a way that it was going to be fewer episodes. And he
I think they only wanted 9 or 10, yeah.
Right. And he insisted, no, it has to be the entirety of this thing. It's all important. It's not filler. It's there for a reason. You may not like it. You may not appreciate the reason, but it
doesn't want you to like
choice.
it.
Yeah, no.
A lot of the time, it doesn't even want you to.
To say that it was just there to pad time is absurd.
No one fights for the right to pad their thing out. No one's fighting to have filler. People are fighting to put things there that are intentional.
Sometimes that intent is just getting someone who you love the work of and making sure that they get like a pretty good paycheck off of that.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm okay with that as a reason for doing it, but there's a reason it's there. It's not just to fill space.
And those are all part of the ethos of this podcast, which is why we're going to take a 5-minute moment of silence right now. Just kidding. Anyway, geez, I'm so glad to hear you guys echo those thoughts, because I legit feel like a crazy person when I try to enjoy things on this level. I'm so bad at watching TV by myself. I'm trying to get better at it. I play video games by myself a lot, but with TV, I really like to have someone there to help keep me on task and keep me focused, partially due to ADHD and the trillions of distractions I have available to me. But if I'm experiencing it with a person, that gives me an excuse to sit there and pay full attention, because then we can talk about it afterward. I can reflect back at them what I thought about it, and it makes it feel like something that happened instead of just something I was there for. When I'm watching Twin Peaks, which I watched entirely alone out of lack of interest from anyone around me, because they all heard it's boring and it wastes time and the plot goes off the rails and it's actively hostile and uninterested toward the viewer having a good time or getting something out of it every single moment. So many people thought these things keep them from getting into things like Twin Peaks. But what I try to tell them is this is the exact value. This is the exact thing that you get out of it. And if you just sat there and tried your goddamn vegetables, just eat some vegetables that don't bring you pure pleasure and see what it does to you. See what it makes you think about. Even if you don't love something, experience something, because it will still tell you something about yourself and the things that you do like.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to approach any form of media. Media is an artistic statement by someone. And whether they get the artistic statement that they intend to get across or not within the body of that work, well, that can be a whole other thing. But it is a statement of some sort. And so letting the artist take you to that destination, that endpoint, that idea, in whatever way that they decide to approach it, I think is only fair. And you don't have to enjoy it all the time. And sometimes you'll tap out, and that's okay too. You know, art isn't for all people, right? But all people are for art. There is something out there for everyone.
It's one of the reasons I've really enjoyed the last year and a half or so. My wife, for my birthday, has been getting me just like an unlimited cinema pass. And I've really enjoyed the process of going and seeing films, even ones that I don't, going in, assume that I'm going to get anything from.
Sure.
Because sometimes it's nice to just jump into a thing and go, can I find value in a thing I didn't expect to find value in? I did that this week with the animated children's film Dog Man, about a dog's head getting sewed onto a man's body. Turns out that's actually quite a beautiful film about an enemies to lovers queer relationship and male family members trying to break the generational cycle of passing on trauma to your children. I was like, did not expect to get that out of the animated dog cop film, but there you go. Sometimes you gotta let yourself be open to a piece of work being more meaningful than you think it's gonna be.
Even if it's propaganda, because as we all know, cops are good and never do anything wrong. There's good to be found in propaganda.
The main cop in this is useless and so pointless that his body is more used to stick a dog's head on than to be a cop anymore.
Wow. So it's RoboCop, the animated series?
Literally throw the head in the trash, put a dog on there, it'll do a better job.
Amazing. Boy, so did you go to the cinema by yourself, or did you go to this as a collective experience? I'm curious to know.
Wow. This is a thing. As a workaholic, my wife got me this unlimited cinema pass, and most of the time I use it to go see films alone by myself, the middle of a weekday, where I have a bit of time, and just go have solo experiences, and then I come back, and usually it'll involve I'll come home and explain what I thought was interesting about a film my wife has not seen to her upon returning home. It's like, I know you'll never go watch this. Here's me trying to find something of interest to tell you about a thing I saw. And that forces me to think about weird bits of art that I don't put as much thought about going to see as I do about, I saw it, what do I think of it now?
I haven't heard of such an enriching solo theatrical experience as on February 14th of 2020, directly before we all went onto the quarantine island the time before this. I went to see, it was my first Valentine's Day where I was single in my entire adult life. And I decided to go by myself to a movie, which is something I never did. And I went to see just to confront myself with the sad reality I was going through and face it. I went to see the first Sonic the Hedgehog movie on Valentine's Day in the year of quarantine. And that was the last time I went out in public for a few months at that point. So, yeah. And that was an equally nuanced and rich experience as Dogman sounds like, from what I'm hearing.
Look, sometimes you have no choice but to go, that's the piece of media I saw, I've got to think about it now, I guess.
God damn it. Sonic the Hedgehog, the first one, is also propaganda. God fucking damn it.
Everything's fucking propaganda. It's everywhere.
Why is Sonic the Hedgehog best friends with the cops? No. I don't like it. Anyway, we're obviously, we're probably nearing the end of our rope for this topic. We've been going for almost 2 hours. I genuinely wish we just had all day to talk about this stuff. If you guys did not have the actual capability to walk away from this call, I would never let you leave. I would continue having the stream, and I would never wake up from it. So to touch upon the idea of the whole dreamer, and these show notes will be available on the Patreon to anyone who's crazy enough to want to read them without being involved in this project. So I don't want to talk to you all about my free association, Link's Awakening, Twin Peaks themes too much. But just to go back, because Conrad, you did say Link is, within this nightmare, he's sort of containing this evil. He is the Windfish's egg in his mind. The Windfish's egg on Koholint is containing the Shadow Nightmare, which is basically, as far as I can tell, just the psychic form of the same energy that creates Demise and Ganon and Vati and all these, it's just the darkness that all these things sprung from. And now it's taken on a new form as part of a shadow nightmare that's haunting a whale or whatever. But when you think about this in relation to Twin Peaks, throughout Twin Peaks The Return, and again, this is a spoiler-agnostic podcast, as the pre-recorded intro will remind listeners, because we do not believe Twin Peaks can be ruined by spoilers, and we think that it can, especially Jonathan and I, only think it can be enhanced by spoilers. But throughout Twin Peaks The Return, we start off the season by getting confirmation that Dale has become the new vessel for Bob to enact his evil upon the world. The main character of the game has been so poisoned by the evil that previously had corrupted Laura Palmer and kicked off this whole mess to begin with. He's the new vessel for that, and he is out there He's trapped in the lodge, and his body is out there enacting this evil into the world. When I think about that in relation to Link's Awakening, I think about how Link's Awakening came out. They probably had only seen Twin Peaks Season 1. Air dates and development times have overlap for Season 2. So they probably hadn't seen the ending of Twin Peaks, the original, when they were making Link's Awakening. That's almost as certain that they hadn't seen it. But it's interesting that they wind up at even vaguely the same destination with their thoughts about where the story of Twin Peaks is going, because by my thought process, if Link is the dreamer and the Shadow Nightmare is Ganon's energy, like you say, the trauma from Link to the Past invading his mind, the hardship of the battles that he has had to go through because of the divine light that has shone down upon him from the goddess Hylia and made him rescue Princess Zelda in every generation. He's been plucked out of obscurity and given this task, and it has irrevocably corrupted and possibly destroyed his inner life by trapping him in this nightmare and making him abstract everything as a nightmare a giant fish is having. Point is, when you think about the fact that the essence of Ganon, the essence of evil in the world, after Link kills it and traps it in the Dark World, a separate dimension from Hyrule, the only part of it that still exists out and about in Hyrule, unsealed from the world, is the shadowy influence that it has lingering within Link's mind. He is now, within Hyrule, the only trace of Ganon's power that exists. So while he is the one who vanquished it and caused it to not be causing direct harm to other denizens of Hyrule at this time, he is now also the only one carrying that energy forward into the world. And it's not his fault, and he may never be able to fully overcome it and remove the poison from his psychic system. So we're seeing in Link's Awakening, by my theory, a psychic journey where he tries to destroy the energy of Ganon from within his own mind. He's trying to purge just the last little bit of that evil, shadowy influence that he has eliminated from the rest of the world. Now he must purge it from himself. And when you get the perfect ending to Link's Awakening, instead of just the island disappearing, when you get the perfect ending, which I believe is no deaths, which
I believe so, yeah.
I had one on my save.
Ah, jeez.
Yeah.
And you had the mental integrity to not rewind or reload a save, huh?
Yeah, no.
You're not that.
I didn't have the time.
I respect the integrity, even though it makes you a failure, honestly. Yeah. But anyway,
we all are. That's again the human tale that is Link's Awakening. Is that ultimately we're all failures, and I think I'm interested by the theory that you're putting forth. I do think that there is something to the idea that the presence of that energy, that malignance within the framework of Link's dream is meaningful. I think thematically it's interesting in how it ties back to Twin Peaks, because I think it's an illustration of how it exists within us all. While there is certainly a difference between, say, a Leland Palmer and the rest of us,
I should hope,
we all have the capacity. It's always there. It's always present at the edges of ourselves that we could exert evil of some form. It's there. And one of the overriding themes across Lynch's work, but especially in Twin Peaks, is the illustration that there has to be a balance between that you have to have that darkness. It needs to exist, and it needs to be shown, because by seeing it and experiencing it and knowing it, we gain an appreciation for the donut and the coffee. Those are the two sides of life, and you can only truly gain an appreciation for the good things in life because you have knowledge of the evil.
I want to recommend a piece of media here very quickly that I think about a lot in terms of that sort of the darkness and the light have to coexist. It is a piece by an artist called Ren, and it is a song called Hi Ren, that is primarily someone singing, basically having an argument with their own worst elements, but it turns into spoken word poetry at the end, talking about that life is a pendulum between the light and the dark, and you cannot fight the fact that one cannot exist without the other. It is a back and forth that must be explored. I think that is an interesting piece of media to look at in terms of like crystallizing that whole thing that Lynch explores, that idea of both of them are there. You can't fight to not have one of them exist. You just have to acknowledge that it's there and work to make sure it has a counterpart.
And that's all of our responsibility at the end of the day. And Link, I just want to mention, so to finish that thought, only when you get the perfect ending is Marin freed into the world. And Marin is not necessarily just Zelda, but she may just be the ultimate representation of light, like the counterpart to the darkness. She is the ultimate representation of light, just like Zelda and the goddess Hylia, by extension, are within this world. And by getting the perfect ending, I think what we're seeing is that Link has freed the spirit of good, which had been quashed by this evil, back into the world. Marin, even if she is not a real person, even if she goes into reality as a seagull and remains a seagull forever as she escapes Koholint, she is now the new seed of light that can go out into Hyrule and flourish and be planted in order to grow by the next time Ganon's influence has leaked back out. And something endemic, just built into the character of Link and the world, the lore that they have accidentally built at Nintendo by being uninterested in story, is that Link himself is going through an endless cycle of being reborn throughout new vessels in history. We don't even know necessarily that they're all tied to the same bloodline. They may be very well somewhat unrelated boys who happen to share connected qualities and basically have the pureness of heart that the goddesses can pluck him out of obscurity and set him on this path. He's just the perfect vessel for the good of the world, even if he does not represent it like Zelda does. There's some overlap. There's not perfect analogs here is the point, and I'm not going to reduce things by trying to make them necessarily. But, so Link is perpetually reborn into the world. Something we never see in Zelda games is what's happening when Link is gone, when there isn't a current Link in the world, which must be vast swaths of Hylian history where there is no Link on a current journey, there is no current threat, because Ganon will sit in the background in the Dark Realm or wherever he's been sealed away this time, and he's just sort of festering there, unable to directly affect the tangible Hylian reality. So Link, when he awakens, I think that he was containing the last of Ganon's influence in him, and even though by awakening he's able to free Marin and the spirit of light back into the world, I think part of what it's also depicting is, since this is between canonical Zelda entries that take place in reality, this is the Link to the Past Zelda after he goes on a journey, after that journey, and before he goes on the Oracle game journeys. So he has 4 separate adventures, but presumably at the end of the Oracle adventures and this, he dies and is reborn again eventually, however many dozens or hundreds of years further into Hylian history, Link is needed again. But we never see what's happening when Link isn't around. And I think that there's something to be said for the fact that when Link is born into the world, when a new Link is selected, it's perhaps because the previous Link, the spirit of Link on the psychic plane, has completed a journey like Link's Awakening. Is it possible that after each major adventure, a Link has to go on a deeply psychic journey in order to purge the evil from themselves? And in doing so, that allows the spirit of Link to move on to the next little boy that it selects to be the hero. And it also, by a new Link awakening, unleashes the spirit of Ganon and the spirit of evil and erodes the seal that keeps that from escaping back into Highland reality. Is he both a vessel for perfect good, and by just existing, he is allowing evil into the world?
My only thought, I think, in response to this is I will note there is one place we see a Hyrule with a dark, malevolent, evil force unopposed by Link, and that is in the backstory to Wind Waker. That is a world in which the ancient evil rises, it breaks free of its seal, and there is no hero to oppose it, to the point that Hyrule has to be flooded to try and contain this as a thing. And I don't think this necessarily disproves the thought you're having, in that this is not a new instance of the evil coming to be. This is a instance of the evil that was thought sealed in a reality where Link has been sent back to go enjoy his childhood. The evil has been dealt with. Very specifically, it is one of the consequences of the multiple endings sort of implied by Ocarina of Time. It's, you deserve to go and have a childhood and grow up and not have to exist in a world where the trauma of what you went through, of being forced to grow up too quickly and face this huge burden, you can leave that behind. That's not your problem. Go be a child. And in a world where Link is not forced to sit and carry and live in the remnants of the trauma that he went through, that evil is able to bubble back up without him there to carry that burden. Because very truly, the reason that evil was unopposed was that he was permitted to just go be a child and not sit with that thought of, what if it comes back though? What if it comes back though? I've got to be ready in case it comes back though.
Yeah, and it's possible, that's a very good point. It's possible that even in the backstory of the Wind Waker, there could have been an avatar of Link born into the world. There could have been a boy born into the world, but what we do know is that he never appeared to oppose the evil. And something built into the very sacred and very official Zelda timeline is the fact that there is an entire branch early on where Link fails. And that threw a lot of people for a loop at first. We had never considered Ocarina of Time already branches out into two paths explicitly because it involves time travel. But we had never considered the history where Link died in Ocarina of Time, and he never defeated Ganondorf to begin with. So what if that happened before Wind Waker as well? A Link appeared and he tried to rise to fight evil, but he drowned or he got killed by a moblin. Or an Octorok shot him in the face.
Link's Awakening is almost proof of that, in that it is the only Zelda game I'm aware of that has an ending for you never died. You never died, and the ending is this. That implies something is different about the state of the world if you died. Even if it's only in your dream, your failure changed something. And reality is materially different because you were not able to succeed.
And, wow. Again, just wish we could drill down into this for an hour, but remarkably well summed up. And final thing about Link himself that relates to this I want to mention is, when we talked about Link being the dreamer versus the player being the dreamer, or the players or the developers being the dreamer, something we didn't really consider, and I want to bring up, is that Link is named as such famously because he is a Link to the world of the game. It's one step above just naming a character avatar or player icon.
Or hero protagonist.
Yeah, exactly. Hero protagonist, like Snow Crash. Yeah, so it's one step above that sort of thing. It's Miyamoto and his team winking at the video game loving audience, being like, hey, this is just your Link into the world. And the original Zelda game, we don't need to get into this too much, Link was also called that within it, because it was meant to also involve time travel between multiple eras and possibly realities, where Link would be also not only the link between the player and the world, but a link between the different aspects of the world itself within the game. He is the only thing that can transcend not only the barriers in the world of the game, but he transcends the barriers between the piece of fiction and our reality by allowing us to become him, by being the empty space that we are allowed to embody and act upon the world via the agency of. So when you ask if Link is the dreamer, or if the player is the dreamer, or if the developers are the dreamer, Link himself is a lot like Twin Peaks in that all the connections can be drawn back to him ultimately. Link is all of these things at the same time.
Well put.
Yep.
Well, anyway, I'm hanging up now. I'll see you guys later. Anyway, no, but we'll actually end the show like we're professionals here. I think anyone who actually wants to hear an original conversation about this that I haven't heard on any other podcast, and again, I'm not comprehensive. I haven't heard anyone drill down into things this exact way. I haven't heard any Link's Awakening podcast drill into this in the exact same way. I think we're offering something new and fresh, and while that is surprising, what surprises me less about it, and you talk about how sometimes things just require even slowing down and taking a moment to think about them before you realize they're not really that far below the surface if you just look downward and look for them in the first place. So not to blow smoke up you guys' asses, but what shouldn't surprise me now that I've slowed down and examined this, what shouldn't surprise me is the fact that you two have all of this to say about Link's Awakening and Twin Peaks, and it feels like you have hours and hours and hours more to say that we don't have time for. That shouldn't surprise me because, boy, this whole project started because I wanted to hear what people like you think about these things, and eventually how you think about these things to think about everything else you think about. I want to know how media like Twin Peaks and Link's Awakening and everything else that has spun off from that ethereal mindset that's invaded our culture. It's a way to bring not only you and me together and our listeners together, but I want it to be a conduit through which you new listeners, especially people who aren't familiar with Twin Peaks, who may have trouble being convinced to check out a Twin Peaks podcast in the first place. I want everyone to get something new and original out of the connections being drawn here. I want people to hear what Conrad Zimmerman thinks about my screeds regarding whether Marin is created as a result of the collective reductively male gaze of the protagonist and the island as a whole. And of course that is reductive because, it's just stream of consciousness. But Conrad, boy, we could write an entire doctoral thesis, and I shouldn't be surprised that these kind of thoughts are coming from the two of you, because I listen to so many of your thoughts in my free time, both of you. I'm not just talking to Conrad. I listen to so many of you guys talk about things like this in my free time, and I hear perspectives every week as I listen to them that make me reconsider how I think about at least something in my life, whether it's something as minor as how I enjoy the video games that I do, or how I think about the industry around them. You two have a rare quality that's supposed to be a given to artists like us, where you are out there, as far as I can tell, not parroting the thoughts of others all the time, but breaking new ground all the time. So this is the longest possible lead up to say, if people want to hear more again, let's repeat it as many times as we need to. If people need to hear more again of your original thoughts here, Conrad, on this and many other topics, where can they find you on the World Wide Web?
So I'm going to just preface this by saying, while I appreciate the flattery and the praise, I'm sort of one of those people who believes that there's no such thing as an original thought. and we are all just distilling other ideas down into more accessible, concrete forms that reflect the culture of our time. But you can see and hear and watch me do that at Conrad Zimmerman on Blue Sky. You could hang out with me on Twitch at twitch.tv/thatconradzimmerman. You can buy anti-capitalist propaganda that I make at mercenarycreative.com. And you can hear me on other podcasts, including Podquisition and Let's Talk About Snacks. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
I will, and I have, and I will continue to do so in the future. And I want to preface before moving on to Laura's plugs, because I also want to know where to find her. I've never seen her around because she does so few projects. But before I move on to that, I just want to say that I think something shared between true creative thinkers is a sense of humility like you have, Conrad. I think that that comes with the territory, and in order to be considered a true creative thinker, sometimes you have to, and to qualify as one, you have to not believe that you are. I think that you need to believe, just like David Lynch thought that he was a conduit through these ideas, a window that he opened to allow these ideas into the world and nothing more. I think that by saying that you're just distilling all of these ideas around you and that makes them non-original, that discounts the process that these ideas are going through when they are alchemized within your mind.
If you say so. I'm not, if you say so.
Well, and it's good for me to sit here and compliment you. No one wants to sit here and listen to you firewank with us about how great you are anyway. So, Laura, I'm also going to tell you, because I originally meant this to be a double plug bag lead-in, but Laura, just because you weren't the explicit planned guest for this episode and you were added in before the recording, I'm not going to make you feel any less featured. Laura, geez, I mean, like, just to give the listeners some insight, I already talked about this a little with Jonathan. Neither of you know me as anything other than some weird fan of you guys' friend Sterling, who I am not friends with, and I'm not going to pretend to be friends with, no matter how much my parasocial instincts have forced me to think so in the last 2 decades. But we only know each other through this project because I liked the things that Conrad and Laura have to say. And Laura, especially, like, you're an incredibly important person in my life, especially relative to how unimportant and how on the fringe of yours I have been. So when we talk about pieces of art and just creators having an influence on our life, I'm not going to say that, Laura, that you're this generation's David Lynch.
Give it to Laura!
I'm not going to say that. And I'm not even going to imply it, because that would be, again, reductive and weird and stupid and doesn't really make a point. But I am going to say that just like David Lynch has led me to this exact moment in my life, you started me on this path of wanting to even think about these things in any productive capacity over a decade ago with your, I mean, back before covering indie video games was cool, you were exhaustively covering indie video games in depth. And I think that that's had a profound impact on me. Your work at Indie Haven, where you got your start, you founded the site, if memory serves.
Yes, this was the site that we, back in the day, our sort of mission statement was we wanted to give indie game coverage the same, like, degree of reverence as AAA game coverage was getting elsewhere. That was our little thing that we were like, that's our unique little angle.
Yeah, and it seemed like a niche concept back then. And indie game coverage has come so far since then. It's much more mainstream, but, still within the public consciousness, indie games, either something that a lot of casual observers don't know about, or they don't even know that they're indie games, that there's a distinction at all. So they don't think about it. But just like the works of David Lynch have been toiling around the fringes of being actually popular with casual observers and having to smuggle in their weirder ideas through a soap opera like Twin Peaks in order to get them past the radar. I think that people like you helped smuggle indie game coverage into mainstream game coverage. And that has had profound ripple effects throughout your industry. I won't call it our industry because I don't do anything in it. But I think that you are specifically much more of a pioneer than you or anyone around you has given you credit for.
That's very sweet of you to say. I as someone who was bumbled from project to project for a decade, scattershotting with ADHD as I do, it's nice to hear that something that I did a while back has felt impactful.
I mean, you talked about indie video games on podcasts and wrote blogs about them, and it has led me to where I am. So just like David Lynch, it's a way that we have all become connected here. And if people want to further connect with you to that end, where can they find your most recent work?
Most of what I do can be found at Laura K. Buzz, wherever you find people doing things. Various projects that you can find me on. For the last many years now, I've been part of a weekly Dungeons and Dragons podcast called Dice Funk. I'm on seasons 3 through, I think we're on 11 now, telling all sorts of little fantasy stories together. I talk about video game accessibility on the internet under a couple of different series. There's Accessibility, where I do solo video essays, and Control-Alt-Access, where myself and another disabled creator, Arevia, talk about smaller stories that have happened in video game accessibility. I've recently started a series called Abletop, which is conversations between myself and Carrie Waterton talking about board game accessibility. And one that I've been doing recently that I've been having a lot of fun with is 15 years ago, I watched an anime called Wandering Sun and came out as trans that same night. I binged 12 episodes and then went, fuck, I have to come out as trans.
Wow.
And didn't watch that anime again for 15 years. And I am now coming back to it and revisiting it with 15 years of hindsight. I'm not usually a reaction content kind of person, but I'm making over an hour-long videos about each 20-minute episode of this show, basically tripling the length of an episode, talking about, like, okay, now that I have 15 years of insight, let's talk about why this felt important and maybe criticisms I have of it down the line. And those are all going up on YouTube at the moment.
And I'll be keeping track of them there. Boy, and the accessibility thing, that goes to what I was saying about your indie game coverage. I think you've also managed to, and you have a better view of how much you trailblazed this, but boy, I don't see anyone talking about accessibility in games, which is not a pet interest of mine because I don't directly relate to it, but I find it fascinating how when you started working in that space, it seemed like something that was so incredibly niche that it was like, why would anyone cover this? And it has morphed over the years into, this is such a profoundly large part of the gaming populace throughout various aspects. So many people need accessibility features for myriad reasons in video games, for physical and mental differences between them and the people the games are made for. So it went from seeming like such a niche thing to, how is nobody else talking about this? How is she the only one talking about this? And that's the kind of effect you have on those areas of expertise, as you elevate them from who the hell cares to why doesn't everyone care?
That is a very flattering thing to say. I definitely, look, I started talking about video game accessibility at a coincidentally very good time. I could not have known when I started talking about video game accessibility that it was about 4 months before we would get the definitive example that people for years would point to as the example of it being done right. I am very glad to have been in the right place at the right time to pick up the wind of that conversation.
And you were just a window and you allowed that conversation to flow through you. If that's what you choose to believe, if that's how you choose to rationalize your place as an artist in the world, I'm not going to argue with either one of you. But I insist on throwing the value of it in your face as much as possible. So again, it can't be emphasized enough. You can hear these two give their thoughts about the video game industry and what video games they're playing every week on Sterling's podcast, The JimQuisition, which is just, boy, next time I talk to Jonathan, I really need to drill down on how Stephanie Sterling is just the most profoundly impactful person to me. Someday I will try to tell them, although I assume they will rebuke it even further and more violently than you have. But the thing is that this is essentially a spin-off of Boston's Favorite Son, which is essentially a spin-off of the JimQuisition, and Sterling's fan community has the same connective power through weird absurdity that Twin Peaks itself does. And I think that it's very strange that Sterling was not a Twin Peaks fan until last year and helped me get into being a Twin Peaks fan, helped prompt me along. It's strange that they had that relationship with Twin Peaks and accidentally created something that I feel parallels Twin Peaks and resembles it entirely accidentally. It's incredible. So everything comes back to Twin Peaks, everything comes back to Sterling, everything comes back to Jonathan Off-Road Rules. That's the overarching message here. And with that, I wrap up our plugs by just saying, Conrad and Laura, thank you so much for listening to me jaw about this and jawing at me. My favorite times during this recording were when I wasn't talking and I just got to listen. So thank you so much for being here.
That's sweet. My favorite times during this podcast were when I wasn't talking too.
I get that impression you feel that way about every podcast.
All the time.
This is why I love doing podcasts. I'm here to be like, right, tell me things I haven't thought about before. Let me soak it in.
We are just crackling with the electricity of one another's ideas. Boy. But thank you so much. I will let you both go to enjoy your life here, your quiet island life on Quarantine Island in Boston. Nothing bad has ever happened here, I'm sure, just from what we heard about it from Wikipedia 2 hours ago. Nothing bad has ever happened here. Nothing bad ever will happen here. And I'm almost certain when I leave this island, the two of you will continue to exist.
Phew, thanks for finally saving me, guys, but you didn't have to be quite so rough. Now let me just get this bag off my head and... Egads! You've vanished. Just like the boatsman before you. And in your place is... Oh. It's the last thing I ever expected to see. There's no easy way to say this, Eileen, but laid out in the dank cave lake before me, well... It's the corpse of Jonathan Off-Road Rules himself, by Willem Dafoe's beard in the lighthouse. Could he really be dead? But wait, there's something very wrong here. Very, very wrong. This Jonathan looks not a day over 21 years old. Why, he's simply not meaty, bald, or tired looking enough to be the favorite son myself and all of Boston has worshipped for lo this many years. And he's even wearing a name tag with some sort of preposterous moniker. What celebrity in their right mind would go by the name Freaky Constantina?
Freaking Constantina. Freaking Constantina.
And now that I look closer, he's wrapped from head to toe entirely in the iconic mesh tank top that my client JSS mentioned dozens of times in their initial investigation request. But Jonathan hasn't worn this in decades, since it went out of style. Mesh tank top. Back in style. Eileen, there it is again. It's as if the spirit of Conrad Zimmerman's missing mustache is speaking again.
Jonathan will not raise his profile. He is fully secret.
Please, mustachioed one, I beg you, be plain with me.
Is Boston's favorite son dead? Or just his career?
Jonathan, his career, dead, before it even began. What could it mean? What the heck? Behind me, an elevator door opening. At least that's what it sounds like. Why, there better not be any cliffhangers back there when I turn around.
The happening be happening.
Fix Your Heart or Die podcast is hosted by Shy Fox and produced by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Music by Daniello Sanfortalamenti. Sound effects sourced from Pixabay. Check the show notes of this episode for links to our guests' social media and additional resources about the projects they're promoting. Join us on Patreon at patreon.com/fixyourheartpod.
Me and Anus were a real match.